In the last video, we were working with layer blending modes. Well, in this particular video, I'm going to take it one step further and we're going to introduce layer blending styles. Now, layer blending styles simply enable you to be able to add different design elements to individual layers to add that extra bit of polish. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to close the file that we were working on. And you'll see here that I have another 4 images open. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just change the working space just so we can see all 4 images. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this particular image here as the base image for this tutorial. So I'm actually going to copy the other 3 images and paste them into this particular file. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to select all and then I'm just going to simply copy and paste. And then I'm going to copy and paste and copy and paste. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump back to our single image work layout, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to simply turn off a couple of these and I'm going to start to resize them using edit free transform. I'm just going to resize them to a size that looks reasonably okay for a photo montage. So that looks relatively okay. Okay that. And then I'm going to turn on another layer and I'm going to resize that one. I'm going to try and resize it so it's about half the size of this particular photo. So that's not too bad. And then we'll do this one. And we'll just bring that down. I'm going to lock this layer and I'm just going to bring this down to 25:7, the same size as the last image I resized. Grab the move tool again. And we'll just chuck this on the right hand side of this particular image. So there we go, we've got a little bit of a photo montage with a couple of multiple images put together to form a sort of a nice looking wedding album photograph. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some blending styles to each of these individual layers in order just to give that extra finish to this particular image. So using layers, you can create things like shadows, glow effects, image borders, beveled and embossed edges, colors, gradients, and patterns. To add a blending style to your layer, simply right-click on your chosen layer, and what you'll notice is you'll have blending options as a menu item. Now, if you were to select that, you could actually bring up blending options, but there are also a couple of other ways of also bringing it up. You can also double-click on your little image thumbnail on that particular layer, and that'll also bring up your layer style window, or you can go up to layers and then go to layer style, blending option. Now you'll also notice here that you have all of the different layer styles that you can apply to your different layers. So I'm going to select blending options, and once again you'll see the layer style window. Now the first thing you'll notice is you'll have on the left hand side of your layer style window is you have all of the different style options that are available to you. Now with each one of the style options will come a set of controls that will control the impact and effect of that particular style. So as you can see, if I click on drop shadow or inner shadow, you'll notice that the actual control settings slightly change as I go through them. Now let's just turn those off. The other thing you'll notice with this particular window is you have a preview checkbox here, which you can turn on the turn on and off the preview of the layer style that you're actually applying, and you'll notice this little square box here. Now the square box allows you to preview your layer styles based on this little gray square. So it'll actually apply the styles that you actually select and set up to this little square, so you can see how they affect that square, as well as the layers you've got in your image. So to start out with, what I'd like to do with this particular image is I'm going to use drop shadow. Now drop shadow is really great for adding that extra bit of depth to your image, and what you can do is you can choose a particular angle that the drop shadow comes in at. So in this case I'm going at 135 degrees, and I'm going to leave it at 75% opacity. I'm going to leave the blending mode, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the distance. So as you can see here, you'll notice on not only the preview of the square, there's a little shadow underneath my layer. There's also a shadow underneath the actual visual layer that you can see there as well. You can adjust the size of this, which will actually diffuse the actual shadow so it looks a bit more realistic. So you can play around with that. Not only that, you can actually change the color of that shadow if you wanted to by actually selecting a particular color. If you didn't want a solid black, you could have a different type of color. Now, there are some other variations similar to drop shadow that allow you to do things like add an inner shadow to your particular image. So in this example, if I was just to uncheck that, you could actually add an inner shadow, which does give an interesting effect as well, as you can see there. So it looks like as if you're looking into the photo, and then there's another photo that's actually sitting underneath, which it does give a lot more depth to a particular image if you're playing around with these types of things. You can also add things like an outer glow or inner glow. So an outer glow would be similar to a drop shadow, except for it would be more of a glow effect. So as you can see here, as I increase the glow, it goes right around the actual image, which I'll just move this across just to make that a little easier to see. It goes right around this particular image, and you can also select a particular color and also a gradient if you choose. So that's also another very interesting effect that you can use. And as I said, it also allows you to do inner glows as well. Along with that, you can choose to do bevel and emboss edges. Now that's a very interesting effect as well, where it actually will add a highlight and a shadow to the edges of your layer. So as you can see here, as I increase them, you'll notice you have on the left hand and top corner you have a highlight edge, and on the bottom corner and the right hand corner you have a shadow edge. And you can control the opacity of each one of those and the sizing obviously from here, but you can also, the opacity sits down the bottom here, so if I didn't want so much shadow on my particular layer, I could actually choose to reduce that. Now along with that, you also have Satin. Now Satin does a similar effect, and it's actually quite interesting because it adds a solid color overlay, which you then set an opacity setting to it, and then you can actually choose to change the size. Now by reducing, well, actually increasing the size or changing the distance, you can actually add an interesting sort of checkerboard effect to your image, and you can actually diffuse it. So it does give you some really tricky things that you can do with your photographs if you wanted to. In this particular example, I don't really use Satin that much, although I can see that it can be very useful for certain effects. Say if I wanted to add an image that sat on top of this and had that as the background, that would be an interesting effect that I'd be curious to see how that would look and actually use. Now along with this, you can also change the contour of the actual style itself by setting up a curve, which is very interesting. But there's also some preset ones that you can click on here and change, which will change the actual highlight points and the actual points, shadow points, where the actual solid colors are being applied to. Now along with Satin, we have color overlay. Now color overlay simply adds a solid color to your entire layer, and you can change the opacity of that, and you can also change the actual blending mode of that setting as well. That's very interesting if you're just after solid colors within your images, but it's something I really don't use with my photography. It's more something I use with signage and things like that. Along with that, you also have gradient overlays. It does a very similar effect, but that can also be used for, as I'm sure you've seen previously in Camera Raw, where you can actually add a gradient to your sky, for example. Well, you could do a similar thing in here. Instead of applying it to your with a color fill, you could actually apply it within a blending mode. So in this example, you can go in and change your actual gradient settings, and in this case, if I wanted to actually add density to the sky, I could change the opacity there, click OK, and what we could do then is knock the opacity of this back, and then you could also play around with some of the actual blending modes that we've already looked at in a previous video in order to sort of get a result that you'd be happy with actually using. You can also do pattern overlays. Now, pattern overlays allow you to basically add a repetitious pattern to your layer. Now, it has a series of patterns, default patterns that come with Photoshop, and here I've only currently got 2. Along with that, you can also add your own particular patterns and create, save, and load your own patterns, which can be very interesting. So you could add different textures like a rock face texture or a tree texture or something like that that you could apply to your image, similar to what I did in the last video with that tree texture that I applied to the boat image, and I used a blending mode such as multiply in order for that to be see-through. So you can do things like that, so that's very interesting. And not only that, you can change the scale of the actual pattern itself, as you can see there. So you can end up with some very interesting effects, but in this particular example, it's not very useful for what I'm after. One setting that is very useful for what I'm after at the moment is stroke. Now, stroke allows you to basically apply an outline around your particular image. So in this case, I'd love to see a white border. So I'm going to set the color to white, and I'm going to increase the size. And I'm going to actually, as you can see there, it's set to outside and it's got round edges. Now, I don't actually want round edges. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to inside, and that will retain solid corners. And then I can just play around with the actual white border to get something that I'm happy with. So maybe something around 46. That's not too bad. And then you can obviously play around with your blending modes and your opacity if you choose. But in this example, I'm going to leave that set there. I'm going to go to the drop shadow. I'm going to apply that again. As you can see there, the drop shadows come into play. And we've got a reasonably interesting looking layer at this point in time. I'm going to drop the opacity back a little bit. Might actually reduce the size of that outline. There we go. That looks a bit better. And we'll click OK. Actually, before I click OK, I'm just going to show you, you can also save new styles. So that's where you can actually save a preset or a predefined set of style settings and controls that you set up. So in this example, if I wanted to retain the settings that I've set with my drop shadow and stroke style, what I could do is actually create a new style, and allows you to actually create, name it, and then choose whether you want to include your layer effects or your blending options, and you can choose to select both and then click OK, and then it becomes a new style for you to jump to. So in the future, if you're doing a lot of repetitious work where you're using the same type of effects and styles over and over again, you can actually go in there, create your own preset, and then just go and select it when you come into when you're actually editing your images, just to save you time. So that's very useful as well. So if I click OK, we can then now go to these images and also edit them in order to give them a similar effect. So as you can see, there's quite a few different variations of blending styles that you can use, and most of them will actually have the opacity setting on them, so that's something that you want to play around with. Now, you'll also notice once you actually add a blending style to a layer, as you can see over here in the right hand corner on the layers panel, that you have an FX icon that has now shown up on this particular layer, and that just simply represents and indicates that this layer has effects, so that's FX. Also, you'll see there is a little right arrow. Now that simply opens and closes the little drop down options here that are available. and they simply display the effects that you've added to your image. So in this case, I've added a drop shadow and a stroke. So under effects, you'll see drop shadow and stroke. You can choose to turn the visibility of those settings on and off here. So that's extremely useful if you want to know what you've actually added to that layer. So from that point of view, it is also very helpful. So now we've finished with this particular layer. What I want to do is apply the same layer styles to the other layers that currently have no effects. So if you remember, we actually saved those settings as a preset in the layer styles window. So in order to actually apply them, we need to go to the window menu and actually bring up the styles panel. So I'll click on that, and as you can see now we have the styles panel. And the actual style that is on the very bottom says wedding style. So that's a style that we created for this particular layer style. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the layer that I actually want to apply that to, and then I'm going to actually click on that style. And as you can see now, it's actually applied those same style adjustments to that layer. So we'll go ahead and do the other layer as well. Now in this particular example, we could also, if we wanted to, because they're smaller photographs, we could actually reduce the size of the actual border if we wanted to. Because smaller photos don't tend to look that great with a larger border. So in order to do that, I'm just going to open this quickly up. I'm going to go to stroke. I'm just going to reduce the actual size of the border to say 20. And now we'll also do the other layer as well. Like so, and there we have it. So that's sort of an effective way of actually using presets and applying them to multiple layers without having to actually open up blending options and go and actually do all the settings again. So that's going to save you some time in the long run. Now the next thing I'm going to do to this particular image is I actually want to add a text layer. So I'm going to actually go to the text tool. And in some cases, you could actually add the bride and groom's name, but in this case, I'm just going to actually type in wedding. And as you can see there, I've got the word wedding, and I'm just going to position that accordingly. So that looks not too bad. I'm just going to drop that underneath those layers. And what we can do then is actually apply some further layer blending styles. So we'll just open up, so there we go, open up layer style. And instead of actually applying, say, a drop shadow or a stroke, we could apply a beveled emboss. And we'll just add a contour line as well. And what we can do is actually increase the size of that if we wanted to. Such like that. And we could reduce the shadow slightly, maybe to about 50. Click OK. And I might just drop the opacity back on it so it becomes see-through. And there we have it. So layer styles can create some pretty interesting effects, especially when using multiple layers to design montages for photo albums, invitations, and even posters, where you'd like to add that extra bit of detail to make your images stand out.